The United Nations had got used to American presidents turning up for a fight.
I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Donald Trump.
We can no longer be taken advantage of or enter into a one-sided deal where the United States gets nothing in return.
But in New York today, the UN heard a very different message.
We're back at the table in international forums, especially the United Nations.
The world thought it knew what it was going to get from a Biden presidency, not least Britain.
Mr. Biden, a quick word for the BBC.
The BBC, I'm Irish.
Conventional wisdom had it that the 46th president would be antagonistic, perhaps even marginalise the UK.
My reading of the Biden administration is that it's a lot more pro the UK and a lot more pro Boris than sometimes people give it credit for. I think we're seeing really close cooperation where it counts, where it matters.
There is at least one area of cooperation that didn't exist under President Trump.
You knew I was going to bring it up. Climate change. You know, he's great on that. And he wants to cut CO2. He wants to get to net zero.
The UK is about to host the UN climate conference in Glasgow. Both the UK and US administrations need it to succeed.
I think the climate issue is one of the things that differentiates President Biden so strongly from Trump, and the fact that he is now pushing hard for an ambitious deal at the Glasgow summit, promising more money for green infrastructure in developing countries, is a real boon to the Prime Minister. There is still, I think, a lot of work to do to come out of that Glasgow meeting with a success, but having America shoulder to shoulder with Britain definitely increases the prospect we'll get a successful outcome. Good news for the Prime Minister.
But other areas may not be as straightforward for the US-UK relationship. In New York today, the President outlined his big theme, of which the pullout from Afghanistan, however chaotic, was emblematic.
We've ended 20 years of conflict in Afghanistan. And as we close this period of relentless war, we're opening a new era of relentless diplomacy.
Asking for partner help on Afghanistan, in Iraq, all those kinds of things took up so much time, energy, space. I think the hope of what I heard from Biden today, certainly my personal hope, is that energy and time and space gets used for these diplomatic challenges, because there are so many of them.
Although the president didn't mention China by name in his speech, it was clear he had the struggle with China in mind during much of what he was saying.
The future will belong to those who give their people the ability to breathe free, not those who seek to suffocate their people with an iron hand.
It's not like the Soviet Union when it was the evil empire. You know, all of our countries need to work with China. And so it's a much more complicated approach than in the past. It's a more nuanced approach, and it's difficult to define, and it's certainly hard to explain to the public what you're doing and why you're doing it.
But competition with China could negate UK and US efforts in other areas.
We shouldn't underestimate that America is changing. Their focus is moving towards China and the Asia-Pacific area, and they have less time and attention for European security. And over the longer term, that's going to become an issue for the UK.
The UK-US post-Brexit trade deal now looks as far away as ever, and President Biden has raised concerns about the UK abandoning the Northern Ireland Protocol of the Brexit deal with the EU.
The Northern Ireland issue is important not just to Biden, but it's important to the U.S. Congress. Nancy Pelosi, the head of the House of Representatives, as you know, was here. The Speaker of the House of Representatives was here just the other day, and she also was saying that we may not sign a trade deal with the UK if we're not happy with what's going on in Northern Ireland. So it isn't just Biden; it's Congress. It's many Americans who have, feel very emotionally attached to Ireland.
I think the Boris administration has got its work cut out in terms of persuading the Biden to see its point of view on a number of things, not least the Northern Irish Protocol. I think other governments have been much more effective at making their views known in Washington.
As the two leaders meet in the White House this evening, the UK-US relationship has clear tensions and challenges, but there seems to be a level of engagement that few predicted when Mr. Biden took office.
Well, that was David Grossman. Joining us now, Dan Hannan, Conservative peer and member of the Board of Trade, and Brendan Boyle, the Democratic Congressman who sits on the influential Ways and Means Committee. First of all, though, we start with Sarah Colenbrander, Director of Climate and Sustainability with ODI Global. Sarah, can you put this China announcement into context for us? Is this a game changer?
I think it confirms that the end of coal is now in sight. We've seen investment trickling out of it for some time. Private sector finance has been slowly withdrawing as the economics of coal has changed. Until recently, since 2013, Japan, South Korea and China have provided over 95% of international finance for coal. But China was really the big player there. It provided twice as much as South Korea and Japan combined. South Korea and Japan both pledged to end international finance for coal earlier this year. And so China's announcement is the final nail in the coffin for coal.
So what will people do? I mean, in terms of what that gap leaves in terms of power now, if that's all over the developing world, what will replace it?
So this is not necessarily a commitment to close down existing coal-fired power plants, but to meet on new demand and growing demand from most of the emerging and developing world with much cleaner sources. And the specifics of that will vary from country to country: geothermal, hydro, wind, solar. But the technical feasibility and the commercial viability of renewables is now competitive with coal, not to mention all the wider benefits like bypassing the horrific air pollution so often associated with the era of coal-fired power.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Let's pick up then with Brendan Boyle and Dan Hannan. Just on this issue, first of all, if we can go to you, Congressman Boyle, if the aim was to move the dial on climate change between these two leaders today, that has worked. This has been a successful meeting, hasn't it?
Well, great to be back with you, Emily. And yes, and coming into this presidency, I looked at climate change as probably one of the main areas where President Biden could work with European leaders, including the British Prime Minister and British government, and replace what obviously had been a very antagonistic relationship between Donald Trump and most of our allies. The reality is, if we are going to, while this is a controversial issue here in the U.S. domestically, it isn't worldwide with respect to climate change. And if we are going to make the ambitious goals of the Paris Climate Accord, we frankly have to accelerate our efforts.
Yeah. Dan, I was reading, you wrote, I think, just last July, is it worth decarbonising the rest of the world if the rest of the world won't follow? You were standing in Derbyshire at the time. I guess now the answer is yes, it is worth it. If China is really stepping back from future financing of any new coal mine, then that puts the boot right back on all of our feet as well, doesn't it?
It certainly makes a big difference. China is responsible for about 28% of all global carbon emissions. And of course, with the best will in the world, we've made very substantial reductions already. We're less than 1%. So this has to be a global effort. That's not to say that, you don't do anything. Obviously, somebody has to move first. You can't say that no one should do anything as long as one country is holding back. But it does mean, I think, that we should approach it in a business-like way, in a transactional way, in a hard-headed way, not in a kind of millenarian spirit of assuming that this is just a sort of test of your virtue. And I think Boris and Joe Biden are doing that. I think they are looking at ways in which we can make the change affordably and proportionately and in line with market principles.
When you talk about transactional, Brendan Boyle, the one thing that isn't there, and we know won't be there this trip, is any work on a free trade deal. Boris Johnson said he recognised the US president had bigger fish to fry. Now, won't that always be the case with Britain? I mean, how do we make a case for that trade deal if there are always bigger fish to fry?
As you know, I serve on the House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over trade issues. We have no planned meetings on any sort of prospective U.S.-UK trade deal. President Obama then 5 years ago famously said that any consideration of a bilateral trade deal would go to the back of the line or back of the queue, as you would say. The reality is here, and that's no disrespect to the UK, it's just a reality of so many other competing priorities for us in Congress. Even on trade, certainly our relationship with respect to China, with respect to implementation of the USMCA, our biggest trading partners, Canada and Mexico. right now those issues do take precedence. And again, that's not because of any slight of the UK. It's just a practical reflection of size and the extent to which we trade with these countries.
Dan Hannan, we are literally at the back of the queue.
I'm sure there will eventually be a trade deal. The economics all point in the same direction. A million Brits work for American-owned companies. A million Americans work for British-owned companies. We are each other's largest investors because of all the obvious commonalities of language and common law and accountancy systems and all the rest of it. I think that there will probably be a rethink in Washington about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think that the UK and the US will be partners there.
Do you mean part of this deal? I mean, there is talk tonight of a sort of piggyback deal with the Mexico-Canada arrangement. Tell us, is that possible from where you're sitting, Brendan Boyle, that the UK could enter into that deal?
I serve on the committee that would have to vote on it, and I can tell you I haven't heard one word about that. I mean, it is just not a subject that ever comes up here. It does sometimes in the context of Northern Ireland. Aside from that, though, frankly, it's just not an issue that ever comes up.
I have to say, I'm obviously speaking to different people in Washington from the Congressman. I've had a lot of conversations on both sides of the aisle about this, and I've come across a lot of enthusiasm in both chambers. I mean, obviously, there are distractions at the moment. We have this wrecking ball coming in of the coronavirus. But
well,
as
hang on,
we
Dan.
come out of it, we're going to...
But Brendan Boyle sits on the committee. You would have to vote on it. If he's never heard of it and if it's not on any of the talks or any of the agenda this week, then presumably he would know if it was coming round the corner.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I heard the Congressman giving an interview a few months ago talking about whether the UK trade deal would come before or after the EU one. So it's obviously not something that he's never thought about. And by the way, on that, there shouldn't be any competition. I mean, I want there to be a US-EU trade deal. I want us to have rich neighbours. I want the EU to prosper. I want Ireland to prosper. You know, the best outcome for everyone is that there should be a general global removal of trade barriers. It's not some kind of beg your neighbour thing.
Yeah, I'll say this. I mean, speaking first, so people understand right now, and when I say right now, I mean literally the next 10 days, these are some of the most important votes on domestic issues that I will cast as a member of Congress. Some of those include climate change. Really, the totality of the entire Biden domestic agenda is coming right down to the wire. So that here is frankly crowding out any other sort of topic, any sort of consideration of any of trade deal, that's for sure. That having been said, though, let me say this. I'm someone who believes strongly in the transatlantic relationship. I've been concerned at the way the West has been divided over the last 5 years. I think anything we can do to get Europe, the UK, the United States back on the same page would frankly benefit us all.
And when you talk about Europe, the UK and the US, where does the positioning of Joe Biden, who always calls himself an Irishman when he's asked about the UK relations, where does the Northern Ireland Protocol fit into all that?
Yeah, so this just isn't a controversial topic here, as you know. I mean, we've made it clear going back to June of 2016 just how important preserving the Good Friday Agreement is to us. I accompanied Speaker Pelosi and 10 of my colleagues when we went to 10 Downing Street and communicated this message several years ago and a former prime minister ago. There has been no change in that. And just recently, I was part of a letter in which 36 members of Congress from both political parties, from progressive Democrats to conservative Republicans, wrote to the British Prime Minister to show our continued interest and concern as it relates to the Irish peace process.
Dan Hannan, do you sense there is a kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a naughty step period, that the UK government has to prove that it understands how deals work before another one comes along?
Do you know, I've never really understood why people think we need to be lectured about keeping the peace in part of the UK. I mean, who has a greater interest, who has a greater incentive than we do in the prosperity and stability of Northern Ireland? And it's been one of the things that's been going on for as long as I can remember, that you know, Irish American lobbyists like the Congressman feel that kind of we need to be told to do this. I mean, if you think of how much turmoil and how much bloodshed we suffered there, we have more interest than anybody in preserving peace and stability.
I guess, Brendan Boyle, the question is, does the president understand that Northern Ireland is part of the UK? You know, if it was you exporting to Hawaii, you'd have a different feeling about this.
Yeah, well, so first, I'm a member of Congress, not a lobbyist. Second, it is quite clear that an active American presence was needed in the 1990s and throughout the last several decades to ensure we had an even-handed treatment of both communities in Northern Ireland. I have been very concerned that some have spoken in a breezily, even dangerous way when it comes to the Good Friday Agreement, even some talk in some circles about scrapping it altogether. So I happen to think that the U.S. presence here has been good over the last 30 years. Certainly, former Prime Ministers Tony Blair and John Major have also communicated that. And either way, it is going to continue.
OK. Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks for joining us this evening.